I wrapped myself in a soft cardigan, more for comfort than warmth, and padded into the kitchen. The Californian winter was mild compared to what I'd seen in books or movies, but the evenings still carried a crispness that snuck through the cracks in the old window panes. Adam was at the stove, humming an off-key tune, his tall frame relaxed as he flipped something in the skillet. The smell of garlic and butter teased the air. "Another masterpiece," I teased, leaning on the counter. "Just pasta," he replied with a crooked smile. But I added a little lemon zest this time. "You'll thank me later." The dynamic between us often baffled people. Strangers mistook us for a young couple, maybe partners in some startup, rather than mother and son. It was understandable. I'd had him when I was 17, and our lives had been intertwined in ways that blurred traditional lines. We were a team, had always been. With no father in the picture, it had been just us against the world. Over time, the boundaries of our relationship softened, and we became less like parent and child and more like friends. Best friends, even. "Beer or wine?" Adam asked, opening the fridge. "Surprise me," I said, pulling 2 plates from the cabinet. We moved seamlessly around each other in the small kitchen, a dance perfected over years of shared routines. Adam poured 2 glasses of pale ale and set them on the table, where the glow from the TV bathed the room in flickering light. It was another night like so many others. Good food, a shared show, laughter echoing between us. "Hey, did you see that new surfing video I sent you?" he asked as he twirled spaghetti onto his fork. I did, and it was incredible. The way he caught that wave. It's almost unfair how effortless he made it look. "We should go down to Malibu this weekend," Adam said, his eyes lighting up. "Weather's supposed to be perfect. You can bring your sketch pad." "That's tempting," I admitted. "But aren't you swamped with work?" Adam shrugged, the corners of his lips quirking upward. "I can always carve out time for us." That was Adam. Unfailingly thoughtful, even with his demanding IT job. His ability to prioritize the things that mattered never ceased to amaze me. It was a quality I both admired and envied. Sometimes I worried he gave too much of himself away, pouring energy into others while neglecting his own needs. We settled into the couch after dinner, the faint clink of beer bottles punctuating the soundtrack of the movie. The rhythm of these evenings was soothing, predictable. Yet tonight felt different. I couldn't put my finger on it. There was an undercurrent in the air, a weight to the quiet moments between our laughter. "Kate," Adam said suddenly, his voice pulling me from my thoughts. He rarely used my name. It was usually just Mom or some teasing variation. "Yeah. Do you ever feel like—" He trailed off, searching for the right words. "Like people misunderstand us?" I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. It's just—" He looked at me, his gaze steady yet uncertain. "The way people look at us sometimes. It's like they can't figure us out." I laughed softly, trying to defuse the moment. "Well, we are an enigma. Maybe we should start dressing alike. Really throw them off." But Adam didn't laugh. He studied me with an intensity that made my stomach flutter. "You don't think it's strange? That we're this close?" I set my beer down, the unease in his voice tugging at something deep inside me. "Why would it be strange? You're my son, Adam. We've always been close." He nodded, but the crease in his brow remained. "Yeah, but I'm not a kid anymore. And sometimes I think about how different it all is. How different we are." The air between us felt charged, as though the room had been vacuum sealed. I opened my mouth to respond, but found that words escaped me. There was a vulnerability in Adam's eyes that I hadn't seen before, and it stirred a cocktail of emotions I wasn't ready to name. "Adam," I began, but my voice faltered. He shook his head, a rueful smile tugging at his lips. "Forget it. I'm overthinking again." But as the movie played on, neither of us was truly watching. The space between us on the couch felt both impossibly vast and unbearably small. And for the first time in a long while, I found myself wondering if perhaps Adam was right. If there really was something about us that no one else could understand. The morning sun streamed through the blinds, its golden rays making patterns on the walls. I stirred under the warmth of my blanket, the faint sound of waves playing in my mind. Then came the knock, light familiar. "You're still sleeping." Adam's voice was a playful nudge. I groaned and rolled onto my side. "It's Saturday. I'm allowed." "Not when I already packed the boards and made coffee." He leaned against the doorframe, a triumphant grin lighting his face. Come on, Malibu's calling. It was impossible to say no when Adam was like this, animated, insistent. 10 minutes later, I was pulling on my wetsuit, a thermos of coffee in one hand and sunglasses in the other. The drive to the beach was peaceful, the coastline unfurling alongside us like a postcard. The air was crisp for a Californian winter, but the sun promised warmth once it reached its peak. By the time we arrived, the ocean was already alive with surfers. Adam wasted no time unloading the boards, his energy contagious. You ready to show me up? He teased as we trudged through the sand. Oh, I plan to. I shot back. Just try to keep up. The water was brisk but invigorating, the salt spray waking every nerve in my body. For a while, we let the rhythm of the waves dictate our movements, each of us catching rides and occasionally wiping out. Adam's whoops of joy echoed over the water when he landed a perfect cutback, and I couldn't help but laugh as I paddled out again, feeling more like his peer than his mother. After an hour or so, we took a break, sitting on our boards as the waves lapped lazily beneath us. You know, he said, his voice quieter now, this is one of my favorite things. Just being out here with you. I glanced over, startled by the tenderness in his tone. Mine too, I admitted. You're not bad company. He grinned, splashing water at me. Not bad. I'm the best company you've got. I laughed, shaking my head. But as we paddled back to shore, his words lingered. It wasn't just the ocean that tied us together. It was something deeper, something unspoken but undeniable. By the time we got home, my muscles were pleasantly sore, my hair still damp with salt water. Adam set the boards by the door and stretched his arms above his head, groaning in satisfaction. Go relax, he said, nudging me toward the stairs. I've got this. You've got what? Dinner, clean up all of it. You earned it today. I raised an eyebrow. What's the catch? No catch, he said, his grin mischievous. Just trust me. Curious, but too tired to argue, I headed upstairs. True to his word, Adam handled everything. The sound of running water drifted up the stairs as I slipped into something comfortable. When I came back down, the house was filled with the aroma of garlic and roasted vegetables. Dinner's in the oven, Adam announced, handing me a glass of wine. But first, he gestured toward the bathroom. What are you up to now? Bath, he said simply, his eyes twinkling. Go. The bathroom was transformed. Candles lined the edge of the tub, their soft glow bouncing off the tiled walls. The scent of lavender wafted through the air, and the water was steaming invitingly. You're serious? I called back, incredulous. Completely, he said from the doorway. You need to unwind. It was a rare indulgence, one I didn't realize how much I needed until I sank into the water. The warmth enveloped me, soothing every sore muscle, every lingering tension from the week. I closed my eyes, letting the quiet surround me. When I emerged, wrapped in a robe and feeling more relaxed than I had in ages, Adam was waiting with a towel slung over his shoulder. Sit, he said, nodding toward the couch. Bossy, I teased, but I obeyed. His hands were firm, but gentle as they worked over my shoulders, the pressure just right. I felt the knots in my back dissolve under his touch, a low sigh escaping my lips. You're good at this, I murmured, my voice thick with relaxation. Years of practice, he replied lightly, though his tone held a hint of something more. You do a lot for me. Let me do something for you. The intimacy of the moment settled over us like a warm blanket. His hands lingered, moving down to my lower back, then back up to my neck. The touch was comforting, but it carried a charge I couldn't ignore. I felt my breath hitch, a reaction I immediately tried to suppress. Adam, I began, unsure of what I was even trying to say. Just relax, he whispered, his hands pausing for a moment. I've got you. And he did. In every way, Adam had always been my anchor, my partner in life's unpredictable tide. But tonight, the closeness between us felt magnified, almost tangible. When his hands finally stilled, I turned to look at him, his face so close that I could see every detail, the flecks of gold in his eyes, the faint line of stubble on his jaw. Thank you, I said, my voice softer than I intended. His gaze held mine for a moment longer than necessary, and something unspoken passed between us. Then he smiled, a small, private smile that made my chest tighten. Any time, he said simply. We sat there in the quiet, the weight of the day settling around us. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, but inside, everything felt still. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. Whatever this was, this closeness, this connection, it was enough. The new year crept closer, and the chill in the Californian air was more invigorating than harsh. Adam had been secretive for days, his boyish excitement barely concealed. Each time I asked what he was up to, he'd flash me that infuriatingly charming grin and say, "You'll see." On New Year's Eve, I found him pacing in the living room, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. "Come on," he said, his tone brimming with impatience. "We got to go." "Go where?" I asked, laughing as I pulled on my coat. "You'll see," he repeated, his grin widening. We stepped outside, the crisp air biting at my cheeks. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. Then my eyes fell on it. A sleek, dark gray Porsche sitting in the driveway, its curves glistening under the soft glow of the streetlights. I froze, my breath catching. "What is this?" I whispered, half disbelieving. Adam's grin turned proud, almost bashful. "It's yours." "Mine." My voice was sharp with disbelief. "Adam, this is insane. You can't." "I can," he interrupted gently. "And I did. You've always wanted one. I remember you saying so years ago. Though, Happy New Year." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My chest felt tight, overwhelmed by the sheer extravagance of the gesture, and the thoughtfulness behind it. "You're unbelievable," I managed, my voice trembling. "But thank you. Really. Come on," he said, taking my hand and leading me toward the car. "Let's take it for a spin." The city at night was a world transformed. The streets shimmered with lights, gold and silver, neon and pastel, as if the entire city had dressed up to celebrate. Behind the wheel of the Porsche, I felt an intoxicating sense of freedom. The engine purred beneath me, powerful and smooth, responding to my every touch. Adam sat in the passenger seat, his long legs stretched out, his hand resting casually on the console. His eyes sparkled as he watched me navigate the city streets. "You look good in it," he said, his tone low and warm. I glanced at him, smirking. "Just the car. Or me." "Both," he replied without hesitation, his gaze steady. The simplicity of his answer sent a ripple through me. The boundary between us, already blurred, seemed to thin further with every shared smile, every glance that lingered too long. We drove for hours, weaving through the streets, the city unfolding like a storybook before us. The air was filled with unspoken words, with connection that neither of us dared to name. When we finally pulled into a quiet overlook, the city lights stretching out below us like a carpet of stars, I turned off the engine and let the silence settle around us. "It's beautiful," I murmured, gazing at the view. "It is," Adam agreed, but his eyes weren't on the city. They were on me. The weight of his gaze made me turn to face him. In the dim light, his features were softened, but his expression was anything but. There was a depth to his eyes, a quiet intensity that made my breath hitch. "Kate," he began, his voice almost hesitant. "Yes," I prompted, my heart pounding. He hesitated, his hand brushing against mine where it rested on the gear shift. The touch was light, almost accidental, but it sent a spark through me. When I didn't pull away, his fingers curled slightly, tentatively, around mine. "Do you ever feel like—" He trailed off, then shook his head. "Never mind." "Like what?" I pressed, my voice softer now. "Like, we're more than this," he said finally, his words careful but charged. "More than what people think we are." I stared at him, the honesty in his voice unraveling something inside me. My chest felt tight again, my thoughts a tangled mess of emotions I couldn't name. But instead of answering, I leaned forward, closing the small distance between us. It started as a simple kiss, a fleeting gesture, a thank you perhaps. But it didn't stay that way. His lips lingered on mine, warm and searching, and before I knew it, I was kissing him back. It wasn't hurried or tentative. It was slow, deliberate, and filled with a depth of feeling that neither of us could ignore. When we finally pulled apart, the silence between us was heavy with meaning. His hand cupped my cheek, his thumb brushing against my skin in a way that sent shivers down my spine. "Kate," he whispered, his voice a mix of awe and uncertainty. I know, I murmured, my own voice unsteady. I know. We sat there for what felt like hours, the city below us forgotten. The weight of what had just happened settled around us. But it wasn't heavy, it was liberating. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to rationalize or explain. All I knew was that in that moment, everything felt right. As the first hints of dawn painted the horizon, we finally drove home, the Porsche gliding silently through the empty streets. Neither of us spoke, but words weren't necessary. The quiet between us wasn't awkward or uncertain. It was filled with a new understanding, a closeness that went beyond anything we'd shared before. By the time we stepped inside, the sun was starting to rise, casting a warm glow through the windows. Adam turned to me, his expression soft but serious. "Happy New Year," he said, his voice tinged with something deeper. "Happy New Year," I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips, and as I watched him walk upstairs, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The day after New Year's was quiet, the kind of quiet that holds the weight of something unspoken. The Porsche sat gleaming in the driveway, but it might as well have been invisible. Adam and I had been circling each other all morning, exchanging glances that lingered too long, hands brushing as if by accident. Neither of us addressed the kiss we had shared, yet it hung between us, undeniable. That evening, as the shadows lengthened, I curled up in my room with a book I couldn't focus on. My thoughts kept returning to Adam. The look in his eyes, the warmth of his hands, the softness of his lips. A knock on the door startled me, and before I could answer, Adam peeked in. "Hey," he said, his voice gentle. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I replied quickly, though my heart raced at the sight of him. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "What's up?" I thought. He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "You seemed tense earlier. I was going to see if you wanted a massage. To relax." The offer was so unexpected, so innocent and yet not, that I could only nod. "Sure." He smiled faintly, moving to the side of the bed. "Lie down." I stretched out on my stomach, my pulse quickening as I felt the bed dip under his weight. His hands were warm, confident as they rested on my shoulders. He began gently, kneading the tension from my muscles, his touch firm yet soothing. My eyes fluttered shut, a soft sigh escaping me as the stress I didn't realize I'd been carrying melted away. "You've been carrying this for a while," he murmured, his voice low and intimate. "You don't take enough time for yourself." "I have you to thank for that," I said lightly, though my voice was thick with relaxation. His chuckle was soft, his fingers working down my back in slow, deliberate movements, as his hands traced the curve of my shoulders. Then lower, I became acutely aware of every inch of space, or lack thereof, between us. The atmosphere in the room shifted, the air growing heavier, charged with something unspoken. "Adam," I said softly, my voice breaking the silence. His hand stilled for a moment. I started to sit up, but before I could finish the thought, he leaned down, his face inches from mine. Our eyes met, and the intensity there was undeniable, pulling me in like a current I couldn't resist. This time, when I kissed him, there was no hesitation. My hand found his face, pulling him closer as his lips moved against mine, soft yet insistent. His weight shifted, and I felt his hand slide to my waist, holding me as if afraid I might slip away. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not now. We parted just enough to catch our breath, our foreheads resting together. His eyes searched mine, his hand still warm on my hip. "Are we really doing this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer with words. Instead, I pulled him back to me, my lips answering the question he already knew the answer to. The hours that followed felt like stepping into another world, one that existed only for the two of us. Behind a closed door, the rest of the world melted away, its judgments and impossibilities irrelevant. There was only us, his touch, my response, and the unspoken promise in every glance, every whispered word. For the first time, I let myself stop thinking, stop worrying about the lines we were crossing or the consequences waiting on the other side. For the first time, I simply felt, and it was beautiful. Afterward, as we lay tangled together in the quiet, the weight of what we'd done began to creep in. Adam's hand traced lazy circles on my arm, his breathing steady but thoughtful. "What happens now?" he asked, breaking the silence. I stared at the ceiling, the shadows of the trees outside dancing in the faint moonlight. I don't know, I admitted honestly. But whatever it is, it stays between us. He nodded, his hand tightening around mine. We'll figure it out. Together. His words were simple, but they carried a conviction that steadied me. Whatever we had become, whatever this was, we would protect it. We would hide it behind carefully closed doors, in stolen moments and quiet glances. It wasn't the life I had imagined for us, but as I looked at him, his eyes soft and unwavering, I knew it was a life I wanted. The days turned into weeks, and somehow we made it work. In public, we were mother and son, our easy camaraderie intact. We laughed, we teased, we surfed. But in private, behind the sanctuary of our walls, everything was different. The closeness we shared, the intimacy we built. It was a love that defied labels, a connection that neither of us could deny. There were moments when the secrecy felt suffocating, when the weight of what we were hiding threatened to crack the fragile balance we had found. But in those moments, Adam would find me, his touch grounding me, his words reminding me why we were doing this. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, his arm draped casually over my shoulder, I looked up at him and saw not just my son, but the man he had become, the man who had grown beside me, shared my life, and now held my heart. "Do you regret it?" I asked softly, my voice barely above the hum of the television. He looked at me, his expression serious but tender. "Not for a second," he said, and when he kissed me, slow and sure, I believed him. Behind a closed door of our lives, love was happening. It was unconventional, impossible even, but it was ours and it was real. And for now, that was enough.